Imagine waking up and seeing $1,000 appear in your account. No message, no sender, no explanation. Just a silent note that reads, "For your future." You'd think it's a mistake, but it wasn't. Because that morning, before most people even had their coffee, Denzel Washington made a decision that would quietly change lives. No red carpet, no press, no camera flashes. Just one man standing in front of a group of students who didn't even know who he was. He looked at them, tired eyes, uncertain hearts, and said softly, "You matter. You're seen. And someone believes in you, even if the world doesn't yet." Then he signed a check. $1 million. Not for a movie, not for a deal, but for something purer, a dream that wasn't his to live, but his to light. He could have posted it. He could have told the world, but he didn't. Because true kindness doesn't need an audience. It just needs a heart big enough to give and quiet enough to mean it. And when the story finally leaked, it didn't just shock Hollywood. It stopped it. Because in a world addicted to noise, Denzel Washington reminded us all of something sacred. The loudest power is the quiet one. The world knows Denzel Washington as the man who commands every screen. Powerful, precise, unforgettable. But what the cameras missed was the quietest act of greatness he ever performed. No press, no headlines, no spotlight. Just a man standing alone in a small classroom one Saturday morning, looking into the eyes of students who didn't know who he was, and saying softly, "You matter. And someone believes in you, even if the world doesn't yet." That day, he signed a check for $1 million. Not for a movie, not for a brand deal, but for something far more sacred, a future. No one was supposed to know. No reporters. No red carpets. No cameras. Just a secret act of kindness from a man who understood that real power isn't in what you earn. It's in what you give away. Because Denzel's story isn't about fame. It's about faith. Faith in young minds. Faith in community. Faith that a single spark of opportunity can light a lifetime of hope. And when the truth finally slipped out, it didn't just shock Hollywood, it humbled it. Because in a world obsessed with success, Denzel Washington chose something rarer, silent kindness. He could have stayed quiet forever, but the world needed to see what it looks like when success remembers where it came from. I was never the loudest one in the room. Even when I was young, I preferred watching, listening, learning. Growing up in Mount Vernon, New York, my world was small, tight streets, familiar faces, and the hum of everyday struggle. My father was a quiet man, a preacher with words that could move mountains, but a presence that demanded humility. My mother, Lennis, worked in a beauty parlor. She had the kind of laughter that could make a bad day less heavy. And that was my first lesson in generosity. Not money, not fame, but time. The way my mother would give her last meal to someone who had none. The way my father would sit with someone for hours after Sunday service. Just to listen. We didn't have much, but there was always enough to share. When I was a teenager, I didn't see it that way. All I wanted was out. Out of the neighborhood. Out of the expectations. Out of the invisible walls that told young Black boys like me that our dreams should fit inside small boxes. I made mistakes, plenty of them. Got into trouble. Lost direction. But somehow, every time I slipped, someone was there to catch me. There was a man named Mr. Carter, my high school coach. He wasn't rich, but he was present. He used to tell us, "You can't let the world tell you who you are before you figure it out yourself." I didn't understand what that meant back then. But years later, standing under bright lights in Hollywood, I finally did. Because every lesson that shaped my life, every moral, every discipline, every value, started in that small, overlooked place where people gave without expecting anything back. I think that's what people forget when they see fame, that it doesn't erase where you come from. It only magnifies what's already inside you. When I first made it in the business, I promised myself something. If I ever had enough to make a difference, I'd go back, quietly, without noise. Because to me, generosity only matters when it's not performed. But years passed. Success came. Films, awards, recognition. And with every red carpet, every interview, I felt a strange tension inside me. The world loved to celebrate the actor Denzel Washington. But deep down, I still carried the boy from Mount Vernon, the one who saw too many friends lose their way because they never got a second chance. I used to visit schools sometimes, talk to kids about discipline, about faith, but the truth is I always left feeling unfinished. Because while I spoke, I knew words weren't enough. Kids don't just need speeches. They need structure, opportunities, hope in tangible form. One afternoon, a young teacher named Marcus reached out to me through a letter. He ran a small after-school program in South Central, one of those underfunded spaces fighting to stay open. He'd grown up admiring my movies, but his letter wasn't about that. He wrote, "We're losing our boys, Mr. Washington, not because they don't have talent, but because they don't have faith that anyone believes in them." That line hit me harder than any award speech I'd ever given. I met Marcus quietly a few months later. No cameras, no entourage, just me, him, and a coffee shop off Crenshaw Boulevard. He told me about his kids, how some of them were brilliant but too hungry to focus, how others were sleeping in cars, trying to finish homework under streetlights. I listened for hours, and as he spoke, something in me started to ache, because I could see myself in those kids. I could see my old friends, the ones who never made it out, and I thought, maybe it's time to do more than talk. Over the next few weeks, I started visiting that center quietly. I'd walk in with a hoodie, no one recognizing me. Sometimes I'd watch the kids rehearse lines for a small play. Sometimes I'd sit in the back of a classroom, watching a volunteer explain math problems on a cracked whiteboard. Their laughter, their curiosity. It reminded me of how fragile dreams can be when the world doesn't nurture them. And yet, even in those modest rooms, I saw so much light. They didn't have new computers. They didn't have air conditioning, but they had belief in themselves and in each other. And that's when I realized maybe my role wasn't just to inspire through movies. Maybe it was to invest in the kind of spaces that built me. So I started to plan, quietly, carefully. I didn't want this to be another celebrity gesture. I wanted it to be personal. Something real, something pure, something that meant the world to the people receiving it, even if they never knew where it came from. There's a freedom in anonymity. When no one's watching, your heart moves differently. Your motives stay clean, and for me, that was all that mattered. That night, the night I slipped the envelope through that old mail slot. It wasn't a spontaneous act. It was years in the making, a quiet promise fulfilled, and yet even after it was done, I didn't feel complete. Because the act of giving, it always awakens something deeper inside, something unresolved, something that traces back to the parts of yourself you thought you'd already healed. I didn't know it then, but that $1 million gift was more than a donation. It was a message to the younger version of me, to every boy who grew up thinking he wasn't enough. It's strange how the world tries to define you. Once your face is on a screen, people think they know who you are, what you stand for, what you want, what you believe in, but they don't see the moments between takes. They don't see the nights you lie awake asking yourself if you're doing enough, being enough, giving enough. After that meeting with Marcus and the visits to the center, something began to shift inside me. I couldn't walk through a movie set without thinking about those kids. Their laughter, their hunger to learn, their eyes filled with questions the world never answered. I'd be standing under studio lights, surrounded by cameras and makeup artists, but my mind was back in that small room with peeling paint and borrowed hope. And that contrast, it started to haunt me. See, Hollywood has a way of rewarding visibility. The louder you are, the more you seem to matter. But I never wanted that kind of noise. I'd spent my whole career trying to protect the parts of me that fame couldn't touch, my family, my faith, my integrity. Still, part of me began to wonder, was I doing enough with what I'd been given? At home, my wife Pauletta noticed it first. She'd see me sitting alone on the porch after dinner, quiet, thoughtful, just staring at the city lights. She'd ask, "You're somewhere else again, aren't you?" And I'd smile, saying, "Just thinking." But she knew. She always knew. Sometimes she'd join me, just sitting beside me in silence. We didn't need words. We both came from places where giving wasn't about recognition, it was survival. It was what you did for each other when no one else would. She reminded me of that whenever I doubted myself. One night she said softly, "Denzel, you've given more than you think. But maybe it's time you stop giving through your work and start giving through your heart." Those words lingered because she wasn't talking about money. She was talking about purpose. But here's the conflict. When you live under constant scrutiny, every act of kindness gets analyzed. People wonder what your motives are. They turn generosity into a headline, compassion into content. And I wanted none of that. I didn't want to be another celebrity doing good. I wanted to be a man honoring his roots. Still, the tension grew. The foundation team would call, asking if I wanted to make a public donation. "Denzel, there's this new scholarship fund. The press would love it. Denzel, maybe we do a photo op with the kids and it'll go viral." Every suggestion made me feel smaller somehow, because they didn't understand that some gifts lose their purity once they're witnessed. So I started keeping things closer to my chest. I'd visit the center at odd hours, send supplies anonymously, fund repairs through quiet channels. No credit, no press, no applause, just faith that the work was being done. But even then, doubts crept in. Was I hiding out of humility or fear? Was I protecting my values? Or avoiding the discomfort of being misunderstood? One evening, I went to speak at a college event. Afterward, a young man came up to me, early 20s, eyes full of fire. He said, "Mr. Washington, I look up to you, but sometimes I wish you spoke more about what you give back." People need to see it. They need proof that success can be used for something real. His words struck me. I shook his hand, smiled, and said, "You don't need to see a good deed to know it's real." But later, I couldn't stop thinking about what he'd said. Was my silence helping or hiding? For days, I wrestled with that question. Because the truth is, even good intentions can get complicated. Generosity isn't always simple. It's layered with ego, memory, fear, and faith. There was another moment that tested me. A tabloid had caught wind of my quiet visits to South Central. The headline the next morning read, "Denzel's Secret Project, Hidden Cameras, Hidden Motives." They painted it like a mystery. Some even speculated it was a film rehearsal. And I remember sitting at the breakfast table, looking at that article, feeling a mix of sadness and frustration. Because here I was, trying to do something pure, and the world turned it into a story. That's when I almost stopped. Almost decided to pull back, to let the world think what it wanted. Because it's easier to do nothing than to do good and be misunderstood. But I couldn't. Because the kids didn't care about gossip. They just cared about showing up to a safe place every day. I drove back to the center that night, parked outside and watched from my car. The lights were still on. Inside, Marcus was helping a boy read. Two girls were painting a poster for an upcoming play. Laughter echoed through the glass, and I realized the noise of the world meant nothing compared to this. It didn't matter if no one ever knew. It didn't matter if my motives were questioned. All that mattered was that those lights stayed on. Those doors stayed open. Those kids kept believing that tomorrow could be better. Still, the inner conflict stayed with me, because giving in secret is both beautiful and lonely. You can't share it. You can't celebrate it. You can only carry it quietly, like a small flame you protect from the wind. And sometimes that silence hurts. Not because you want credit, but because you want connection. You want to know someone else understands why you do what you do. That's when I started writing letters. Not to anyone specific, just to the younger version of myself. I'd write about Mount Vernon, about faith, about the gift of staying unseen. I'd remind myself that it's okay if the world doesn't notice your goodness, as long as the goodness notices the world. Those letters became a kind of prayer, a way to quiet the noise, a reminder that faith without recognition is the truest form of faith. But even as I tried to stay grounded, a storm was building, one I didn't see coming. Because the day would soon arrive when my secret wouldn't stay secret anymore, when one small act of kindness would ripple into something far bigger than I ever imagined. And with that ripple would come questions, exposure, and a test of everything I believed about humility, generosity, and grace. It's easy to talk about success when you've already found it. It's harder to talk about what almost broke you on the way there. Because behind every calm smile, every speech about faith and discipline, there's always a story that hurts. Mine began long before the fame, long before the roles and the lights. in a small apartment in Mount Vernon, on a winter night that still lingers in my memory. I was around 14 when everything started to shift. My parents were good people, but the world around us was getting harder. My father's church was struggling, and my mother was working longer hours to keep us steady. Money was tight, tighter than I understood back then, and when pressure builds in a home, silence becomes its own kind of language. I remember one night my father sitting in his study, the Bible open but untouched. His eyes were tired, distant. My mother stood in the doorway, her hands folded, her voice soft but firm. They weren't fighting. They were trying not to. That was the night I realized love isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet and tired but still holding on. A few weeks later, my father moved out. No shouting, no slammed doors, just a goodbye hug that said everything words couldn't. I didn't understand it then. I just knew something inside me cracked. For months, I carried that weight, confusion, anger, loneliness, and I didn't know what to do with it. I started hanging with the wrong crowd, skipping class, testing limits. There was this edge inside me, sharp and restless, like I wanted the world to notice my pain. One afternoon, I got into a fight outside school. It wasn't about anything real, just pride. The police came. I remember sitting in the back of that car, cold metal against my wrists, thinking, this is it. This is how my story ends. But it didn't. Because of one man, the same Coach Carter who'd once told me, you can't let the world name you before you name yourself. He showed up at the station that night, signed papers, took me home, didn't lecture me, didn't yell, just said, Denzel, this isn't who you are, but you better decide who you want to be. That night changed my life, because for the first time, I understood what real generosity was. It wasn't money. It was grace. He didn't owe me anything. He just saw something worth saving. And maybe that's what every act of kindness really is. Seeing worth in someone who's forgotten their own reflection. Years later, when I started acting, I carried that night with me. Every rejection, every struggle, every casting call where I was told no, I'd remember his face. Calm, patient, believing. That belief became my foundation. But life has a way of testing even the strongest roots. In my early career, when money was scarce and doubt was constant, I lost touch with who I was doing it all for. I chased roles. I chased approval. I chased everything except peace. It wasn't until I stood beside my mother's hospital bed years later that everything came full circle. She was older, frail, but still radiant. Her voice was soft, but her words carried that same quiet strength she'd always had. She said, "Don't forget the ones who believed in you, when you couldn't believe in yourself." Those words pierced through everything, the fame, the roles, the applause. Because I knew exactly who she meant, the teachers, the coaches, the pastors, the neighbors, all the nameless hands that carried me through when I didn't deserve it. When she passed, I promised myself something. I would become the kind of man who gave back what she gave me. Faith in people, especially in those the world overlooks. And that promise, that's what eventually led me to Marcus's program. See, people think generosity is about the present moment, about what you give today. But for me, it was always about redemption, about healing something old. Every time I walked through that community center, I saw a younger version of myself in those kids, confused, angry, gifted, hungry to be seen. And every time I'd leave, that old ache returned. Because I knew that if someone hadn't intervened in my story, I might have become one of the boys I was now trying to save. That realization hurt. It humbled me. It made me see that generosity wasn't charity. It was memory turned into action. There was one boy in particular, Jamal, 14, quiet, withdrawn. He reminded me so much of myself that it scared me. One afternoon, Marcus told me Jamal's father had been arrested. His mother struggling to keep their home. Jamal had started skipping classes, drifting. I asked Marcus if I could meet him privately. We sat on the bleachers in the empty gym. He barely spoke, just stared at the floor. I asked, "You play ball?" He shrugged. I tossed him a ball. "Then shoot." He looked at me, really looked, and for a second, I saw that familiar storm in his eyes. He took the shot, missed. I smiled and said, "Good, now do it again." We stayed there for an hour. No big speeches, no dramatic music. Just two souls on a court, one reliving his past, the other searching for his future. When we finished, he said quietly, "Thanks, Mr. Washington." And I said, "For what?" He hesitated. "For not talking, just staying." That moment broke me a little, because I realized that's all I ever wanted at his age. Someone to stay? After that, I knew what I had to do. The donation wasn't about money. It was about staying, about keeping a promise I'd made long ago in a small apartment with too many bills and not enough hope. Every check I wrote, every dollar I gave, it wasn't coming from fame. It was coming from that boy who once sat in a police car, wondering if his story was already over. And that's the wound that never fully healed. Not because it still hurt, but because it still mattered. Because it reminded me that sometimes the deepest pain doesn't disappear. It transforms. It becomes the reason you give, the reason you care, the reason you stay humble, even when the world puts you on a stage. So when people ask me why I give in secret, I tell them this. Because the most important blessings I ever received came quietly, from people who didn't need anyone to know. And that's why that night, when I placed the envelope through the door, it wasn't about what I was giving. It was about who I was giving back to, every mentor, every mother, every unseen hand that once held me up. For a while, everything stayed quiet, exactly the way I wanted. Weeks passed. The center went on with their programs. Marcus would send out newsletters, talk about new scholarships, repaired classrooms, new teachers volunteering, all without ever mentioning where the sudden blessing came from. That was the beauty of it, watching change unfold without anyone knowing I had a hand in it. But life has its own way of revealing truth, especially the kind that's born from good intentions. One afternoon, I was sitting in my backyard, reading through a script. My phone buzzed. It was Marcus. He sounded nervous, almost breathless. "Mr. Washington, something happened. You might want to see this." He sent me a link. I clicked it, and there it was, a local news story. Anonymous $1 million. Donation saves South Central Youth Center from closure. The camera panned across the building. New paint, fresh lighting, smiling kids holding signs that read, "Thank you, whoever you are." The reporter called it a miracle in the neighborhood. The community was celebrating. Parents were crying, kids were clapping and chanting, "We're staying open." I sat there watching, my heart swelling and trembling at the same time. Because for the first time, I got to see what my quiet act looked like from the outside. There was no mention of my name, no clue. Just gratitude in its purest form, raw, unfiltered, beautiful. But something unexpected happened that night. The story began to spread. First, it hit local stations, then regional, then national. And soon, every outlet wanted to know, who gave the $1 million? The speculation began immediately. Philanthropists, athletes, tech investors. Names flew around like confetti. And with each passing day, the noise grew louder. I kept silent. But the truth is, silence can be heavier than any secret. A few days later, I visited the center again. It looked different now, not just physically, but spiritually. There was light. You could feel it. Marcus greeted me at the door, smiling wide. "We're saved," he said. "We can stay open for 10 more years, Denzel." 10 years. He didn't know it was me. He thought I was just there to check in, like always. We walked through the hallways. New art supplies. Refurbished classrooms. Kids laughing. Music echoing from one room to the next. It felt like a resurrection. At the back of the hall, I stopped. There, pinned on the wall, was a handmade poster. "To whoever you are, thank you for believing in us." It was signed by dozens of children in colorful markers. Tiny hearts, shaky handwriting, smudged fingerprints. And for a moment, I couldn't breathe. Because right then, I realized my secret had never really been about staying hidden. It was about watching hope bloom, about seeing life flow back into a place that almost went dark. But just as that realization filled me, another feeling crept in. Fear. Because I knew what came next, exposure. And I wasn't sure I was ready for that. Later that night, my phone rang again. It was a friend from the press. "Denzel, tell me straight, was that you?" I hesitated. He laughed softly. "You're not good at lying, man." I didn't confirm it, but I didn't deny it either. And somehow that was enough. The next morning, the headlines changed. Sources suggest Denzel Washington may be behind. Anonymous $1 education donation. It spread faster than wildfire. Calls flooded in. Messages, interviews, requests. And just like that, something that was meant to be silent became a story. I didn't feel proud. I felt exposed, because now every gesture I made, every word I spoke, was being interpreted through the lens of celebrity. People started saying things like, "What a PR move," or "perfect timing before awards season." They didn't know it had been in my heart for years. They didn't know about Coach Carter, or my mother, or that boy named Jamal. They only saw what fame allowed them to see surface. For a few days I pulled back, stopped answering calls, stayed home. But something wouldn't let me rest. One night I turned on the news again. They were interviewing a young girl from the center, maybe 12 or 13. The reporter asked her, "What would you say to the person who donated the money?" She smiled, shy but certain. "I'd say thank you, because now we have a place to dream again." Those words, they reached somewhere deep inside me, somewhere old, somewhere tender. And I realized then, it didn't matter if the world misunderstood. It didn't matter if people questioned my motives, because that little girl didn't. She just felt gratitude, and that was all that mattered. A few weeks later, Marcus called again. He said they wanted to host a small appreciation event to honor the anonymous donor, whoever it was. He invited me as a guest, not knowing he was really inviting me home. When I arrived, the center was glowing. The gym was filled with balloons, handmade decorations, laughter bouncing off the walls. I sat quietly in the back, hat low, blending into the crowd. The kids performed a short play they'd written themselves, about believing in miracles. Then, at the end, Marcus took the stage. He said, "We may never know who saved this place, but maybe that's the point. Maybe miracles aren't meant to be named, just felt." The crowd clapped, cried, laughed, and I did too, quietly, from the shadows. That night, I slipped out before the event ended. But as I reached the door, Jamal, the boy from the gym, spotted me. He walked over, confused but smiling. "Mr. Washington, were you here the whole time?" I nodded. He looked around and said softly, "You didn't have to come." And I said, "I did. Because sometimes seeing the light you helped spark, that's the real reward." He didn't ask more. He didn't need to. He just nodded, eyes glistening, and said, "I'm gonna do what you did one day. Help somebody, but in secret." That was it. The turning point. The moment I understood that generosity isn't about legacy, it's about continuation. That when you give quietly, the echo doesn't stop with you. It moves through others, reshaping hearts you may never meet. That night, as I drove home, I rolled down the window and let the city air fill the car. The lights of Los Angeles blurred into gold streaks against the windshield. And for the first time in a long time, I felt peace, pure and still. Because I finally understood, the loudest impact doesn't come from noise. It comes from quiet hands doing good when no one's watching. It took a while for everything to settle, for the noise to fade, for life to find its rhythm again. But when it did, something inside me felt different. Calmer, clearer. Like a weight had shifted from my shoulders to my soul. I started waking up earlier. I'd sit by the window with my coffee, just watching the light crawl over the hills. No scripts, no calls, no cameras. Just quiet. The kind of quiet that tells you you're finally listening to the right things. That's when the realization began to unfold. Not in a grand moment, not in a headline or award speech, but in small, ordinary silences. I began to think about my life. All the roles I'd played, the lines I'd memorized, the applause that came and went. And it hit me. None of that lasts. What lasts is impact. The invisible kind. The kind that doesn't need a camera to validate it. You spend so many years chasing recognition, until one day you realize the real reward is in doing something meaningful when no one's watching. It's in the unseen choices that define who you are when the lights go off. That's what my father used to tell me when I was young. He'd say, "Denzel, true character is what you do when nobody's looking." Back then, I thought he was talking about manners. Now I know he was talking about life. I remember once, years ago, during a filming break, I walked into a small diner off the highway. The waitress there recognized me but didn't say a word. When I finished eating, she slipped a small note with my bill. It said, "Your movies helped me get through my divorce. Thank you for reminding me there's still good men in the world." That note stayed with me for years. Because it reminded me, your words, your actions, your presence, they travel. Even when you think no one's watching, they ripple. And that's exactly what that donation had done. It wasn't about money anymore. It was about hope, the kind that multiplies quietly. A few weeks later, Marcus sent me something. It was a short video compilation, moments from the center after the donation. Kids dancing, teachers smiling, walls painted with bright quotes like "Dream big" and "Your story matters." And near the end, a simple line appeared on screen. "Whoever you are, thank you for reminding us we matter." That line, it stopped me. Because I realized that's what generosity really is. A reminder. A reminder to someone out there that they still matter. That their story isn't over. That there's still somebody who believes in them. And then I thought about my own journey. How many times I'd been reminded of the same thing? By teachers who refused to give up on me. By my mother, who prayed when I didn't even have words. By strangers who encouraged me long before I ever had fame. All of them were part of the same circle. And now somehow I had become part of it too. One evening, I went back to that same church where my father used to take me. It was empty, lit only by the soft glow of candles. I sat in the back pew and just breathed. For the first time in years, I didn't ask God for anything. I just said, "Thank you. Thank you for allowing me to give. Thank you for letting me see the power of quiet kindness. Thank you for reminding me that faith isn't just about words. It's about action." Because sometimes faith looks like writing a check no one will ever know about. Sometimes it looks like showing up without a camera. Sometimes it's choosing silence over applause. That night, I prayed differently. Not for success or strength, but for alignment. To keep doing what matters, even when the world doesn't notice. In the weeks that followed, I started seeing signs of change. Subtle, but powerful. A young journalist who covered the donation told me she'd decided to start a scholarship fund of her own. A studio executive reached out saying he wanted to direct his next project's profits toward community schools, and even one of my co-stars, a man who never talked about charity, texted me saying, "You made me think. I'm gonna do something too." That's when it hit me. This wasn't about me anymore. It was about momentum. Kindness creates its own current. Once it starts flowing, it finds new hands, new hearts, new homes. And the most humbling part? You don't control it. You just light the first candle, and the flame carries itself. Months later, I visited the youth center again, this time openly. By then, people knew. The story was out. When I walked in, the kids cheered. The parents clapped, and Marcus just smiled in that same proud, grateful smile. He said, "You know, Denzel, I think you did more than save this place. You restored faith, not just in others, but in us." I smiled and told him, "I didn't do it alone. God just used my hands for a moment." We stood there looking at those kids, laughing, learning, living. And that's when I realized this was my legacy. Not the awards, not the fame, not the box office numbers. This, right here. Lives touched in silence. Sometimes when I talk to young actors now, I tell them something I wish someone had told me sooner. Your gift isn't for you. It's for the world. If you only use it for yourself, you waste it. Because no matter how much success you have, it means nothing if you don't pour it back into the soil that grew you. And for me, that soil was my community. Those kids were the reflection of a little boy I once was. Wide-eyed, scared, full of dreams he didn't yet understand. I saw myself in them. That's why I gave. Not to be remembered, but to remind them and myself that faith, when practiced in love, becomes purpose. That's the realization that stayed with me. You can't take money with you. You can't take fame, trophies, or applause. But you can leave something behind that outlives you. Kindness, compassion, grace. The world might forget your name, but it will never forget the warmth you left in someone's heart. One evening, as I sat watching the sunset over Los Angeles, I thought about how the world keeps spinning faster, how everything feels loud, impatient, restless. But then I remembered that day, that center, those children, and I smiled. Because I knew in a world chasing noise, there's still power in quiet goodness. The greatest legacy isn't built in headlines. It's built in silence, one heart at a time. And that's what I understood finally at this point in my life. Fame is borrowed. Money is temporary. But love given freely, that's eternal. It's strange how peace doesn't arrive all at once. It seeps in slowly, like sunlight through blinds in the morning. After the story broke, people started talking. Not the usual celebrity gossip or red carpet chatter, but real conversations. Churches brought up youth funding. News anchors asked questions about private giving. Schools started reaching out to their local communities again. And for the first time in years, I felt that maybe the noise around my name was echoing something worth hearing. I remember being at a film set a few weeks later. Between takes, one of the younger actors, maybe 21 or 22, walked up to me, nervous, hands fidgeting. He said, "Mr. Washington, I grew up in that neighborhood. The program you helped, that's where I learned how to write. I just wanted to say thank you." He looked me in the eye, and I saw it. That same mixture of pride and disbelief I once carried as a kid. And I realized, this is what it means to give forward. The cycle continues, just wearing a different face. That night I sat alone in my trailer, the lights dimmed, script open but unread. I thought about how much the world had changed since I started. When I first came to Hollywood, generosity wasn't a headline. Compassion wasn't fashionable. You either did good in silence or didn't bother at all. But now, I saw something new. People being moved not by spectacle, but by sincerity. It reminded me of something I once told my students when I spoke at the theater school years ago. Ease is a greater threat to progress than hardship. And now I understood. That applies to compassion too. If giving ever feels too easy, maybe it's not deep enough. A few months later, I was invited to speak at a small event in South Central. It wasn't a grand gala or awards night, just the community center reopening celebration. The kids had painted murals everywhere. One wall had my favorite quote in big, uneven letters. "Faith without works is dead." As I walked in, people began clapping, cheering, calling my name. But I raised my hands gently and said, "This isn't about me. It's about what we build together." Then I looked around. At the same cracked streets, now filled with light. At those young faces full of fire. And I realized this was bigger than anything I'd ever done on screen. Because in every child there, I saw potential, untold stories, unshaped futures, hidden greatness waiting for a chance. And I thought about how many of them might never know who really helped start it all. And that was perfect. They didn't need to know. They just needed to become. After the ceremony, an older woman, one of the original teachers from my youth, came up and hugged me. She whispered, "You kept your promise, Denzel. You came back." I felt my eyes sting, because somewhere deep inside, I knew I had. Not as the actor, not as the man from the headlines, but as the boy who once sat in those same classrooms, dreaming of something better. Over the next few months, I made a decision, not just to donate again, but to create something lasting. A foundation, quiet, grassroots, no red carpet. Its only rule, all donations anonymous. No publicity, no credit, no names. It was my way of honoring the lesson I'd learned through this journey, that the truest kind of generosity doesn't need an audience. We started small. Scholarships for underfunded students, support for local mentorship programs, funding for film students from overlooked neighborhoods. I didn't attend the award ceremonies. I didn't give speeches. I just watched quietly as lives began to change. And yet, the reward I felt was far greater than any Oscar, any standing ovation, any review. It was the quiet joy of knowing you've done something that will outlive you. Sometimes when I'd walk through the city now, I'd see it in unexpected places. A kid wearing a program t-shirt, a teacher holding new supplies, a mural of hope painted over old graffiti, each one a silent echo of that one night, one envelope, one act of faith. And every time, It reminded me that one spark, if it's pure, can light up a whole generation. The work also changed me as a man. I found myself less impatient, more reflective, more grounded in faith, in family, and gratitude. The same stillness I once avoided had become my compass. My wife noticed it too. She'd smile and say, "You've softened." And maybe she was right. Because for the first time in a long time, I felt complete. It wasn't about fixing the world anymore. It was about doing my part faithfully, quietly, and letting God handle the rest. I'd often tell young dreamers who came up to me, "You don't need millions to make a difference. You just need intention." Because I knew if everyone gave even a fraction of what they could, this world would look very different. Giving isn't about money, it's about motion, about keeping goodness moving so it never dies. And as the months rolled on, I watched that motion continue. Through those kids, their families, their communities. One of the students from the program eventually got into film school on scholarship. Another became a teacher, returning to help the next generation. And Marcus. He expanded the center, opening new branches across the city. Every success felt like a quiet whisper from God saying, "See what one act can do?" Sometimes, when I'd visit the center, I'd walk through the halls unnoticed, just another visitor. I'd stand in the corner watching those kids, laughing, painting, planning futures. And it would fill me with a peace words couldn't describe, because in that laughter, I could hear the sound of something holy, hope resurrected. And that's when I knew, without a doubt, everything I had ever worked for, every role, every line, every long night of struggle had led to this. Not to fame, not to wealth, but to purpose. Purpose that gives life meaning. Purpose that leaves the world softer than you found it. When I look back now, I realize something profound. All along, God had been writing this story. I was just catching up to the script. The fame, the fortune, the platforms, they weren't rewards. They were responsibilities. Tools to do something bigger than myself. And once you understand that, everything changes. You stop chasing. You start serving. You stop talking. You start doing. That's what this journey gave me. A second kind of success. Not the kind that fills theaters, but the kind that fills hearts. Not the kind that fades when the curtain closes, but the kind that grows when the lights go out. Because true success is measured not by what you earn, but by what you return. And that's the resolution of my story. The man who once dreamed of being seen finally learned the beauty of being invisible. In service, in spirit, in love, I've lived long enough to know that everything in life comes back around. The moments you give, the kindness you share, the grace you extend, they all return to you, just in ways you don't always expect. Some people call it karma. I call it divine symmetry. Every day I see pieces of that truth reflected around me. In the smile of a stranger who recognizes me, not for a role, but for something real. In a letter from a student saying they got into college because of a scholarship. That began with one anonymous donation. In the peace I feel when I wake up knowing I used my blessings for something that mattered. That's the kind of wealth I never saw in a bank statement. It's quiet wealth, the kind that humbles you. Sometimes I sit with my wife on the porch as the sun goes down. We don't talk much. We don't need to. She'll reach over, take my hand, and say softly, "You did good, baby." And I just smile. Because I know she doesn't mean the movies. She means life. When I was young, I used to believe legacy was about names carved into marble. Now I understand legacy is carved into people. It's the laughter you restore, the hope you ignite, the lives you quietly touch. I've had my share of applause. I've heard the sound of entire theaters rising to their feet. But nothing compares to the silence that follows an act of true kindness. That stillness where your heart knows it's aligned with something sacred. People often ask me now, "Denzel, why didn't you just announce it? Why keep it secret?" And I always say the same thing. Because some gifts are meant to stay between you and God. See, the world teaches us to broadcast everything, to prove our goodness. But faith teaches us to trust that goodness will find its own way. You don't need a spotlight for grace to work. And maybe that's the final lesson life gave me. You don't measure a man by what he shows the world. You measure him by what he does when no one's watching. Sometimes I think about that night again. The quiet street, the envelope, the trembling hands. I remember whispering, "Do something good with it." And now, years later, I realize I wasn't just talking to them. I was talking to myself. That night changed me more than it helped anyone else. Because in giving away a part of what I had, I found something I'd lost. Peace. Peace that no award or title could ever buy. And maybe that's what we're all really searching for. Not success, not recognition, but peace. The kind that comes from knowing you used your time here for something pure. When I see those kids now, laughing, growing, daring to dream, I see living proof that good still wins. That love in its quietest form still moves mountains. And I think, maybe that's what God intended all along. Not that we be rich or famous or powerful, but that we be useful. Useful in the ways that heal, that lift, that remind others they're not forgotten. Every day I still pray the same prayer. Lord, keep me in service. Even when no one sees it, especially when no one sees it. Because the older I get, the more I realize the loudest form of love is silence. The truest kind of giving leaves no fingerprints. And as I look back over everything, the success, the struggle, the long road from South Central to stages, I never imagined. I understand now that it all led here. To a simple truth I want to leave behind for anyone listening. Be kind in secret, give quietly. Let your goodness speak for you. That's the story I want remembered. Not the fame, not the trophies, just the faith. The faith that even in a noisy world, stillness can change everything. The faith that one act of compassion, however small, can rewrite destinies. The faith that when you choose to give, humbly, silently, you're not losing something. You're gaining eternity. So now when the lights go down and the set empties out, I sit in that silence with gratitude. Because I know somewhere out there, a kid is still dreaming a little louder because someone believed in them. And that's more than enough. What you do for yourself dies with you. What you do for others lives forever. That's the real story of my life. And that's the ending I choose. The city is calm now, dusk settling like a soft blanket over the skyline. Denzel walks down a quiet street. No cameras, no red carpets, just the rhythm of his own footsteps. There's a light drizzle in the air, the kind that makes streetlights shimmer like gold dust. He stops by a small coffee shop window. Inside, a group of teenagers laugh. Around a table, wearing hoodies, embroidered with the name of the very program he funded. They don't know who made it possible. They don't need to. That's the beauty of it. Denzel smiles faintly. The kind of smile that comes when a man knows his purpose and no longer needs the world's applause. He whispers to himself, "Do what's right. Let the world find out later or never." A passing breeze scatters leaves across the pavement. He pulls his coat tighter and keeps walking. One man in the night, carrying a quiet light, because real generosity doesn't make noise. It doesn't trend. It endures. It multiplies in silence, in the lives it changes, in the hope it restores, in the children who rise because someone believed in them. This story is dramatized for inspiration purposes only. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe to TalksBerry and comment.